Thank you everybody for joining and for making it at whatever hour you are joining. And we know some of our participants are at very unorthodox hours joining today. And this session in particular is on digital solution to social protection responses with a focus on outreach, registration and enrollment. So here we're talking about these gateway phases of where new program beneficiaries are entering the programs. As all of us who work on routine social protection or even on humanitarian response know, this is a critical phase because it's called gateway for a reason. It's either you're in or you're out. And we know that the people that we're trying to reach are kind of those who are the poorest and most vulnerable, are the ones who face the biggest barriers to access in terms of passing through that gate. And just breaking it down for sake of clarity on the terms, when we talk about outreach, this is about all those activities, the communication and then the community engagement to make sure that people are aware of the programs, of their entitlement, of how to register and how to submit grievances, etc., etc. The registration is really the moment where the details of people are first how do you say it in English? They're first recorded, and that information is then used to determine eligibility and ultimately if those people are eligible to ensure enrollment into specific programs, sometimes more than one. And in the COVID response, we all know that this has been incredibly complicated. The number of people in need has expanded drastically across all countries. Including in areas of the country that previously weren't covered, so many in urban areas, including types of profiles of people that previously weren't covered, so for example in informal workers. And this has brought around a lot of complication, but also a lot of innovation, and we're here to discuss that together. And this session is hosted by the SPIAC-B, so the Social Protection Interagency Cooperation Board, Digital Social Protection Working Group. So this is a subgroup working across a lot of relevant agencies, focusing on the digital opportunities and challenges for social protection, and also SPACE, which is the Social Protection Approaches to COVID-19 Expert Advice team that I've been leading, and our team will be has been sort of supporting the creation of these clinic call discussions. So I am Valentina Barca, and I'm the SPACE team leader, and we have a lot of people that will be joining either this session or the afternoon session or engaging in the discussion forum, because there's a golden thread throughout all of our time together on these clinics, which is a written discussion forum where we can go deeper than what we can actually do in these live sessions. And if I can very quickly ask for introductions from those of you who are here today. Shall I start with Rodrigo?
Sure. Good morning. Now at a much more civilized time. Okay, I'm Rodrigo Assunção. I come from Brazil. I have worked a lot in the Brazilian government with social insurance, social protection, doing this kind of work. And now I've joined the ILO, where I'm an MIS specialist in the social protection department. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Ralph?
Very good, well, morning, afternoon, or middle of the night, depending on where you are. My name is Ralf Rademacher. I'm head of program at GIZ for social protection programs, based in GIZ headquarters in Bonn. I'm also the chair of the SPIAC-B working group on digital social protection.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ralph. Over to Rachel. I can see you're also here.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here with you today. I'm Rachel Strom. I'm a consultant with the social protection team at Innovations for Poverty Action, and I'm based in London.
Great. I don't know if Veronica is with us on this session. I don't think she is, so I'm going to skip to Raul.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raul Rocha-Frick. I work in the ISA. I coordinate the production of the technical content in the association. And before joining the ISA, I worked in the social security of UI.
Fantastic. And Emrys should be joining us a little bit later. John, I don't think is on this session. If you are, do speak up. And neither is Tina, but Tanya Nino is here with us. Tanya.
Hello, good morning. I'm Tania Nino from Bogota, Colombia. I have experience in the public and the UN sector. And now I am Social Protection Officer for the World Food Program, and I am based in Bogota, very early in the morning.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And
My
so these are
pleasure.
the resource people who we have in the room to be discussing this topic, and they'll be engaging on the discussion forum. But again, these sessions were designed because all of us have answers to other people's questions coming from different countries. A lot of us have been engaging on the COVID response, or even previously on trying to strengthen registration for routine social protection programs. So thanks to all of you who were able to join today. I can see a lot of names of colleagues that I recognize, and I really invite you to join in and participate actively and kind of ask your questions, answer the questions that are being posed. So I'm gonna move to the next slide. And basically the way these sessions work is that we're asking questions and prioritizing questions on a tool which is called Slido. And the link to the Slido is this one, and we're going to have Jost add it in the chat bar right now so that we can all move to that Slido. I'm gonna just shift my screen there, and if Jost doesn't add the Slido, maybe I can. There it is. So if we all move to this Slido, you can see it on my screen, but if you actually go there on there yourselves, you can see that some participants have already been adding questions before the conference, so there's already quite a few questions here. If we could take the next 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, however many we need, to be reading through some of those questions. If you like them, they'll move up in terms of ranking. You'll be prioritizing them. So if there's a question you really would like to be answered first and urgently, then like it so that it gets shifted up, and feel free to add yours down here at the bottom. So I'm going to just be silent for a few minutes. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to give you some time to be adding and prioritizing questions on the Slido. Fantastic. So we've already got a lot of likes up here at the top. I think we've got a clear winner. Let me know if you feel you need a bit more time. Anyone want a bit more time, or shall we? That definitely wasn't 5 minutes I gave you.
There is a tough competition. No?
Yes, and the new questions also get a tougher chance of coming to the top. But the good news is they will all be answered, because we'll be spending time on the discussion forum after this. If those of you who can see my screen will be moving on to the discussion forum after the live part of the discussion, and we'll be providing a lot more depth and links to relevant documentation that might be of use. And this will be a living document for 24 hours and probably more, let's say 48 plus hours till the end of the conference. Haha, Zeta's actually already got 4 likes, even though she's just added a question. Okay. So, I think I might get started because we're already at 11 minutes past, and yeah, we want to make the most of this live part of the discussion. And there's very few ground rules that it would be nice to respect kind of jointly. And it's well, keeping to topic, and the questions are all extremely relevant and extremely important. So we've already done a pretty good job of that. I mean, answers, let's try and keep them short. Each, I mean, we'll be picking up several opinions from different people on each response. And if, honestly, the floor is open, you can unmute yourselves, anyone can speak. And I don't know, you can try and kind of put your thumbs up to say if you want to answer, just raise your hand with the video on, or just start speaking. I really don't mind. It's an open discussion. Let's just keep them short, and we can go into more depth in the discussion forum. Yeah, so sometimes we'll say, well, we'll discuss about that later, and on the discussion forum. So let's go back to the first question that we have here from Saurav on what aspects do we need to focus on during the design phase to ensure that the data collected for COVID-19 are easy to share for use in future social protection programs, so that tedious data collection doesn't have to be repeated. So what can we be doing now, for example, that a lot of registration is happening for new caseloads in COVID-19 that can actually put us in a good position for the future, so that we don't have to kind of go off and collect this data again. Does anybody want to start responding to that? Any volunteers? And I might not be able to see your thumbs up, so just feel free to start speaking.
I'm happy to give a few pointers. Well, Raul, if you want to go first, feel free.
Oh, just some points connected also to the other question. The identifying the relevant data and for enrollment and for identifying the potential beneficiaries, it's a key step. It's a key part of the design, and this involves not only the data in the institution, let's say the own institutional data, but also other data in the country in other, let's say, relevant organizations. And so this may be a design step that it's maybe unusual or not necessarily a usual one when defining a program, but I will say that for COVID-19 responses, in which it's important to identify potential beneficiaries with a, let's say, wide perspective, I would say that it's an important step. Let's say identify data sources and outside the organization. So well, just to make this point. Thanks.
Maybe to connect to that, I think, I mean, obviously, many countries were a little bit, caught by surprise that they need to run out and collect new data, and many did feel pressure to act now after they might have waited long enough, and then it's a bit the question, running out, first priority, do it quickly, and now the question focus on do it correctly, and I think that's obviously not always very compatible. I think the reaction could have been often enough to focus on the most necessary data, but I think what Raul emphasized also to say think beyond is very relevant. What else might you want to do with the data? If you talk about urban cash transfers and you haven't sampled urban areas before, building on previously agreed harmonized questionnaires obviously does make sense, even though it might seem more information than we might normally be needing, or to at least build on the same identifiers which you might have in your digital systems underlying, so that you can later on ideally amend data if you feel you can't go through full data collection exercise. But I think it also depends on who is collecting data. If we are having the same agencies who are normally, catering to the social protection sector, it might be more easy. But if we have, other agencies doing it, either on behalf of the government, be it humanitarian players or players whom we rope in because we suddenly need these many people to quickly collect data, which normally we had taken many months to collect, then we might have a different issue with regards to data protection and the sharing between data systems. So we might be creating buckets of data where it's not that easy to put it all to the same bucket at the end. And then we think about the social protection, the use of this data in the future, but might not be able actually to connect the dots. I think that would have been less desirable, but I think we will probably have examples where this at the end might have happened indeed.
Yeah, and that connects to a few questions which we have further down, and also I mean, the broader issue of that coordination. If it is an external actor who's collecting this data, it's about coordinating with the people who might be able to use it in the future. What is it that they need for their routine programming? How do we ensure just standardization of even the way that we're labeling and sort of phrasing the questions, and sort of making sure that we're aware of those routine systems, and that this new effort for data collection is somehow aligned to that. And we've seen some countries even within their government system. So Chile is actually an example for routine shocks. I'm not talking about COVID here, but where they have a strong underlying social registry, and where emergency registration forms are collected separately with quite a limited amount of data being collected, because there's interoperability with the routine social registry, so that the rest of the data is already there, and then the new data from this FIBE, this emergency form, that gets integrated with the social registry going forward, and it informs future programming and eligibility decisions. I mean, this is the last time that I'd engaged with this was a couple of years ago, but it's this concept that data that's being collected in emergency can have a use for routine programming and informing future caseloads.
So it's mainly
anyone,
updating.
Yeah, Rodrigo wants to add there.
Yes, at the risk of repeating myself, I think we have to understand that we are building infrastructure here, data infrastructure, which is absolutely central. So whatever effort, whatever very small social protection or a huge social insurance or a complete, we are talking about pieces of the puzzle that are going to be absolutely necessary for that society where that is embedded. Yeah. So we must build it in a way that it's going to connect to other things in the future, things that are not even invented yet, things that are not even realized yet. The next emergency, unfortunately, is just around the corner. And we are going to need these data sets again. So we must not connect them to the transaction. We must build them as a data set, preferably in open standards. You don't need to open your data if you have restrictions in that sense. But if you build it in an open standard, when that is no longer the case, or if you need to interoperate with somebody else, then it's already ready for this. So build in open standards, build a data set that stands alone, independent of the transactions you're going to apply in that instance, and build for the future. You are building your society's infrastructure.
Exactly.
Society's infrastructure. So I think those are the key elements.
Yeah, coordinate early with the people who who might be using this in the future, and kind of think through creatively kind of what might be useful now that could help in the future. Does anybody else from in the audience want to be joining in and pitching in here, either with examples or with further comments, or shall I move to the next question? Feel free to just unmute.
Yeah, hi, this is Zara. I totally did not check if anybody else had unmuted themselves. So I currently work for UNICEF in MENA, but I'm here with a lot of different hats on, including my past job in a government where, I was supporting them to be able to look at, what does a social protection information management system look like after a disaster, and how are we going to integrate it, etc. So yes, build for the future, absolutely. But, we make sure we know who the client is and what they need. And it has to fit the government. I mean, one of the things we really, really struggled with in government is we had some amazing development partners and humanitarian partners who wanted to work with us, but they literally all wanted to bring their system because they had their own agendas around it. So if you're going to go in and do it, because governments do need that support, and it's brilliant, and we love the many governments love the technical assistance that is coming in, but please, this is a plea, listen to what they want, like actually listen to what they want, look at their context, look at how it functions, look at how it works. It's not going to be some perfect international brought in standard. It must be customized to what the government is looking for. And I think, I would also like to hear in terms of, we're going to talk quite a bit around digital solutions, etc. right now. And what we are seeing is what we did in a hurry for the COVID response. And, now what we are seeing, at least in MENA, and the support that UNICEF is giving to governments right now, what we're seeing is, now we are refining a lot of the stuff. We did a lot of things with governments really, really fast, which was incredible and brilliant. A lot of it, digital solutions, et cetera, and now we're just trying to tweak and figure out how do we make this better, keeping that eye on the longer term. So if the conversations today can also be like, here's what we learned, here's how we're going to improve, and this is, for the longer term. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just to note that some countries where capacity was constrained and where existing systems weren't very strong actually went for an extreme choice in terms of all those famous trade-offs, deciding to actually respond in a less timely fashion, but to invest in that system building, leveraging COVID as an opportunity to be building up kind of the groundwork for that future system. Nigeria is an example that I've been following where it definitely was not a timely COVID response, but there was a big step back in terms of we've kind of got this nascent social registry. How can we be investing in that as the pillar for kind of future system in the country, and kind of taking it slowly so as not to fall in that in-between situation where you're either going too fast that you actually kind of do things in such a hurry that you're not building foundations for the future, or kind of so slowly that the risk sometimes is that it actually is not a timely response to a crisis. Anybody else from the audience on this one, or shall we try and move on to the next question?
Just quickly like to add, Valentina, that not only I totally agree, but there's a phase where you need to hand over, especially with governments. You're also wanting to build the capacity for them to administer this in the future. So there is an element of governance, because infrastructure needs to be governed. The governance and management of that is also part of this building for the future. Whatever.
Absolutely.
And words matter. Words matter so much, and it's not about handing over, because us coming in from the outside to a government or any kind of a local context, it should have been something that we were supporting and doing already together. So it's not like we have in absentia or whatever sort of built something and we're like, here you go, but it's something that we should have. I know that is probably what you meant, Rodrigo, in terms of what that handover, etc. looks like. But because words matter so much, and how we approach this as well, and our attitude and responsibilities towards governments, it's very much that we have been doing it together, jointly, hand in hand, kind of a thing. So there isn't really a handover. It's more maybe a transition.
Yeah, and an acknowledgement again. Sorry, I think this question we could just debate for one whole hour, but an acknowledgement that this is an iterative process, that you don't start with the perfect system from the start. I mean, if you think of Cadastro on its, I don't know what iteration now. You probably would be able to tell me kind of Cadastro point what it is at the moment, Rodrigo. But we heard yesterday from Colombia in the socialprotection.org conference. They're now on version 4. We've seen countries. Dominica recently, where a whole information system was designed and then it had to be scrapped because it wasn't flexible enough to respond to the needs of that country. It was just fixed on just targeting, for example, using that proxy criterion in that specific way, and the country didn't have ownership to actually be shifting their own system to be responding to changing needs in the country. So a lot of those examples coming out, and here we go beyond the kind of shock responsive element, is just kind of routine supporting government information systems.
I mean, maybe also for the risk that we get stuck a little bit, but it's a very fundamental question and quite interesting one. I think the point which Sarah made in terms of agencies bringing own systems along, I dare say we see that more in the humanitarian domain of I have a standard system which I can apply quickly, and then with the question of what can I do with the data, which I collected in a humanitarian context. I think that in countries where support was given to build up digital tools to support the social protection sector, I have the impression that more often than not, systems were maybe unnecessarily reinvented time and again, from context to context, which doesn't necessarily make them better or more sustainable. If in many countries it were potentially the same companies, were brought in to help program something which at the end, was somewhat tailor-made for that country, but also was pretty much stuck at the point where it was stuck, which wasn't interoperable. And I think it comes back to a point which Rodrigo made in the very beginning, where you refer to open standards. And I think that's a point I want to quickly touch on, because there is a big misunderstanding. An open standard, but you also said that, Rodrigo, is not, open data. Data is private, confidential for the government, and very often, when somebody says open with regards to any social protection data, people already freeze in shock and say, don't want to talk any further. But I think that we are at a point where we need to push these standards, which allow not for standard software to be brought in, but for standard software pieces to be defined, so that governments can choose from an array of different software solutions something which fits their context, but also which can be amended and grown quickly. If we see situations like that, had we been in a situation where we had better standards today, many of the governments would have been more easily been able to plug in, multi-payer solutions for digital payments, for instance, because you can plug in the digital payment platform. The standards for the payers would be defined. Standard contracts would be available very quickly to expand on your system in that case. But I think that we aren't there. We are trying to move to that point a bit better with the SPIAC-V digital working group and cross agencies to get more consensus on these things. How can they look like? But exactly with the point which Zara made, in order to give governments choice of what they want to have, but also being more able to provide good support in a decent framework in that case.
Fantastic, yeah, and definitely a lot of the SPIAC-V digital working group is kind of a lot of the effort has been on this, so that there'll be more coming on these topics. And I'm going to forcefully wrap up this conversation, as much as I'd personally want to debate it forever, to shift to the second question to do justice to the questions that we're receiving here. So the second one is about wanting to know more about countries that have used and leveraged their social registry for selecting beneficiaries to COVID response without collecting new data, but just what they already had. Was the data enough? Did they have to ask for data updates? And what are the lessons learned? And this is a really, really crucial question. I personally would like to also offer an answer to this, but I want to open first to the floor. Yes, Tanya.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to talk about the experience from Colombia, because I think it has been extraordinary regarding social registry and databases and this. So I just going to briefly tell what happened, and then 4 lessons that we have got for this. So first, before the COVID, Colombia was about to launch the 4th version of the means test, the social registry, that is used to target poor people, who is going to be beneficiary of the social transfer, or the big transfer programs. So when the COVID strike, the government declared an emergency and issued a set of decrees. And with this decrees, it was able to use the newest version that wasn't been launched yet, but it was able to use it, and at the same time, it was able to cross all the databases, everything that actually that the government found on their way. It crossed all the databases, and even it was able to cross information with the private sector, which was really a very new thing to do in Colombia. So they use the oldest version, the new version, all the data information for the people beneficiary of the traditional large cash transfer programs in the government. But they use school feeding programs. They use people beneficiary for any kind of schemes, and they cross this information with mobile operators, but which is the private sector, and also with the bank. No, actually the bank information of people, but to know who had a bank account or not, in order to provide quickly the cash. So it was extraordinary, I have to say. They were able to reach almost 3 million families in a very short period of time. But we have so many lessons learned from this experience. One is that it's difficult to find people, because even if they were using the newest version of the ministers to find the people, there is a relationship between vulnerability and permanent change of contact details that makes everything so difficult to find them. So it was difficult. This is the first thing. The second thing was that there was a new big group of poor people, and these new poor people weren't registered anywhere. So they haven't been able to benefit from these kind of transitional cash transfer programs in order to respond to COVID. The third is that it's very complicated to dismantle this kind of program. After you have put everything in place, you have cross-check every kind of databases that you have been able to find the people who are in great need. Is so complicated. So what the government has done is that extended the new program, the new cash program to respond to COVID. It has extended the program until next year. Also because in Latin America, the confinement has been so long, like more than 6 months. So they have to do it. But when you do that, everything comes into place. So you cannot make the quick decisions that you did to respond. Now the banks are going to ask you for more. They're going to ask you for a big contract, and all the operation setting of a huge transfer initiative like this is coming into place. It needs people, it needs bureaucracy, it needs money, but it needs a lot of operational details. And finally, I will say that without the special decrees, this emergency decrees, it will have been impossible to do this kind of experiment. I don't know how to call it, because it's so difficult for a government to share information, not only between the entities as we were talking before, but also with the private sector. So without the emergency decrees, it would have been impossible. They also have been able, they have shared information with the World Food Program, but it's something maybe I can talk later about that. That's it, I leave it there.
Okay, fascinating. And I hadn't noticed a question from Gulsana on the chat bar just before I open to other responses, just to define social registries before we go any further. And it's true that there's been quite a bit of kind of use of the same words for different concepts, different words for the same concepts. And within the SPIECB group, we've tried to just kind of have a common ground across agencies, across people working on this. And the definition of the term social registry is a register of potential beneficiaries of social protection. So it's anybody who has at any point in time been registered, not necessarily enrolled. So these vary enormously from country to country in terms of coverage. So you have in Pakistan, it's sort of almost 90% coverage of population of their national socioeconomic registry. In some other countries, it's maybe 40%. Indonesia and Brazil are around there. Some other countries, even lower percentages of population within the social registry. They vary in terms of the type of information that's inside there. They vary in terms of how they're used, how many programs they're serving, but basically they're repositories of socioeconomic information on people that are potential beneficiaries of social protection. And especially in Latin American countries, there has been a lot of investment in recent years to develop kind of comprehensive social registries. And I'll be posting, maybe Ralph, you could post the kind of either the short or the longer version of the paper where we sort of define some of these core terms, the one with Richard from GIZ. So anybody else want to be picking up this question on the use of social registries, Rodrigo?
Sure. Brazil has a mixed model. The numbers here are a couple of months outdated, but they're big and they demonstrate. Brazil ended up paying more than 66 million emergency benefits during the COVID. And about half of that was taken directly from our social registry, from Cadastro Único. So about nearly 19.2, nearly 20 million were the recipients of the Bolsa Familia, and then the emergency benefit was added on top. And then within the Cadastro Único, they found another 10 million that fit the criteria. So that's the example exactly that you're talking about, Valentina, where older registrations or people who had left the program but were within the registry were being able to be selected just by being there. So it took us to over 30 million people selected directly without the need for any other data collected. But then, of course, the emergency benefit was much, much broader. It went it really tried to gear into the informal economy. So then the Brazilian government opened up a registration process through an app that collected another 37 million people. In fact, they collected another 84 million. But then it was, the selection criteria was reduced to something like 36 million people. So half directly through the registries that we had, half through this new data collection process that was very fast in terms of answering to the emergency. So yeah, you need to have these things ready for emergencies. And then it stops being an emergency, it becomes business as usual, and how you're going to integrate your social policies, be them cash transfers or whatever. Any social policy will need some kind of database to function from now on.
Fantastic. I'm going to just jump on that for my comment. So this is, so my colleague Rodolfo Beasley and I had done some research now a couple of years ago where we'd looked at the potential uses of social registries for supporting shock response. And at the time, we'd actually found little to no evidence of countries using their social registries to support responses to specific shocks. And I'm talking about any type of covariate shocks and especially natural hazards. And even in countries where there was this possibility, there was a strong social registry with high coverage, with sort of relevant socioeconomic data, that choice had not been made, even though when future research was done and when we looked at the overlap between the new data collection and the social registry data, in some countries there was 66, 80% up to 90+% overlap of that new data with the old data that was already retained. And we know that the poorest and most vulnerable are often the ones who are hardest hit. So even if it's just a beginning, it's a good starting point to increase timeliness. Like we can be leveraging that existing data for a timely response and then adding additional measures to reach those who could not be reached. But COVID has shifted this round, and we've seen a vast number of countries leverage their social registry data in the first phases of a response. And partly it's because, the universality of people affected. So many of us have been affected and not the usual suspects. And especially where social registry coverage is high, that means that just by changing the eligibility criteria and sort of not going for your usual suspects, you can reach quite high numbers of population just by doing that. So Pakistan is another example. Quite a few countries across Latin America have used it at least as an initial effort, and then layering on, as Rodrigo was saying, additional forms to bring in those who weren't previously included. And this is in the acknowledgement that just using social registry data can be problematic. It's depending on the approach to having collected that data in the first place. So where that is sort of a static data collection every X number of years. By law, many countries are supposed to collect it every 2-3 years, but we know that often that gets extended because of budget constraints. When we looked at this on average, data was being updated every 7 years in a lot of countries with social registries. So how up to date that information is really important, the relevance of the data, and that's something we can be making a big effort on to make sure that when we're collecting routine social registry information, we're also looking beyond the core poverty criteria, but also at vulnerability to specific shocks. And República Dominicana has been making kind of big efforts in that direction. In the discussion forum, we can be adding more on this topic. Again, this one gets me thriving. Does anybody else want to add a question, comment? Raul, I just saw you.
Oh, just to
Rachel,
add,
sorry, I can't see everybody's hands because I have to scroll up and down. But so Raul, then Rachel.
Electronic hand. No, just to add that it's important also the integration, the coordination with the beneficiaries registry, and it's not only to organize the outreach and registration based on social registries, but also taking as an input of what's going on in the already on the benefits already online and the current and past beneficiaries, because there's let's say vulnerable population may be going in and out from let's say different type of benefits, and the regular benefits or emergency benefits, and some population groups maybe in a, let's say, normal situation, they are not eligible anymore to the regular and social protection benefits, but in an emergency situation, yes. So, and keep the connection to the beneficiaries registry and also maybe to the usual ones, for example, and the family benefits, concerning family benefits, unemployment benefits, etc. Because they include very valuable information that would be important when you have to trigger an emergency program. And thanks, just that.
Yes, fantastic. And that actually links to the next question down below on kind of other innovative approaches and kind of where we can be leveraging various data sources, not just social registries. But Rachel, before we go to that one.
Oh yes, well I can speak briefly about a social registry and then actually piggyback on that to talk about other innovative enrollment approaches. Put myself first in the queue.
Great.
Briefly on the social registry, you mentioned Pakistan, which does have very high coverage of national ID and rich other information about its citizens. One thing that's interesting about the way that their emergency cash transfer program handled that during the pandemic was that it wasn't the case that, you know, the registry existed and benefits were automatically extended to people who were believed to be vulnerable, but rather people had to essentially re-register specifically for the emergency cash transfer program, submit their national ID, and then that was compared against a whole range of databases. And actually sort of pivoting a bit to the next question, despite the fact that most of the enrollment was digital first, the payments themselves were still done in cash because that was seen as the easiest way to sort of do this at scale. And there were concerns that, you know, not enough people had access to digital finance, particularly the poorest people, particularly women as well. There are some other concerns that the way that the, you know, this digital first registration process may have excluded quite a lot of poor women. There's actually some very good case studies on this. So I'll drop links to them in the chat in a moment. But just to sort of think about the fact that simply having the data does not necessarily translate directly into, you know, greater ease of sending the transfers. There may be other types of verification that are needed as well. And then to move to the next question, another really interesting example of a program that's gone digital first for its enrollment has been Togo. Their NoVC program was completely digital enrollment via a USSD menu, and the social registry there is not as well developed. And so instead what they did was that people submitted their national ID number and then self-reported occupational data. The goal of the program was to target workers in the informal sector. And so on the one hand, you know, the requirement for the ID, of course, that's necessary. That does exclude people who, actually it was the voter ID, not a national ID. That does, of course, exclude people who are not registered to vote, which is quite a lot of people. On the other hand, then because there wasn't so much other verification of things like, for example, taxpayer status or something like that, because so many people are in the informal sector, basing it on self-reported occupational data rather than other types of administrative data, which may have been weak or missing, did allow them to target more people in the informal sector. And that, unlike the Pakistan program, was done completely using mobile money. So again, there are significant concerns about exclusion here, people who are not registered to vote, people obviously who haven't got phones, who haven't got access to digital finance. But it's a really innovative program for the region, especially one of the few sort of digital first programs in the region. And so definitely a good example.
Yes, and just as a plug, socialprotection.org has had webinars on the Togo example. There's also, if you even look at just yesterday's session from the very early morning session has got Sanya Nishtad from Pakistan discussing kind of in depth what they did in Pakistan, and the evening session we had great presentations from Brazil and from Colombia. If any of you want to go and look at those in more depth from the mouths of the people who are actually involved in running the programs. So the very useful webinars and videos if you want to go and have a look at that. Okay, so we've sort of moved on to the next question nicely, nice and smoothly. So thank you, Rachel, for kind of introducing that in that direction with Togo's example. Anybody want to be adding anything here on other approaches? And one thing I'd like to make a plug that within the SPACE team, we've developed a sort of very simple typology of what the core approaches to registration have been during this COVID response, kind of both in terms of leveraging existing data in innovative ways. And we're not just talking about social registries, but also beneficiary registries and also CRVS and ID systems, such as in Namibia. And we heard about that case yesterday as well in one of the webinars. And Lena, maybe you want to quickly describe that to us. But also data from existing informal worker organizations, but then even sort of these on-demand approaches via apps, via SMS application, and really, I mean, going digital, but in a moment where information was so widely available about these programs and the attention on these programs was so high that some of the traditional barriers to access were somewhat removed. And even with the pay now, verify later philosophy, all of the reticence of governments of using these digital systems, especially online applications, sort of digital windows for applications for routine programs are quite rare. And if you take a look at that paper that Ralph has linked on the side, we look at cases of routine programming and trying to enhance sort of on-demand approaches to registration is very rare. But for COVID, there's been a revolution here, and there's probably going to be a trend in this direction going forward. So I'll send a link to that and shut up and over to others. I can't see any hands. Or just start speaking, anybody.
Hearing something about the Namibia case study, I think that would be nice.
Yes, Lena, do you want to very quickly tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in quickly. Yeah, I mean, I can speak about Namibia, but I can also mention South Africa quickly because South Africa actually launched a digital application platform for the regular social grant program. And I think it was about 2 weeks ago. And yeah, and I mean, it is a massive step, as you said, because normally regular or ongoing programs, I mean, you queue, you fill in paper forms, it takes forever, it takes months. So it's a massive step. As I said, they've only just launched it. Obviously, the first 1 or 2 days, the system was overloaded, it crashed, and so on and so forth, as we've also seen during the COVID response with some of the new systems. And obviously, we will have to see how it works because from what I can see, people still have to submit documents, certified copies of IDs, and so on and so forth. So there is obviously still, there are still barriers because if you're not trying to apply from your phone and now you have to first get the copies, scan them, upload them, it's not that easy. But I'm very, very curious to see how it will pan out. And obviously South Africa has also moved to online applications for the COVID response and has now very quickly kind of translated that to the ongoing system. And I mean, it's one of the biggest programs in the whole of Africa, 17 million beneficiaries currently. So I think there's huge potential for that. And I'm curious to see, I think we will see it in other countries as well, possibly even with mobile platforms like we saw in Togo's Novisi program, also in Namibia's COVID response grant. So yeah, very curious to see what will be happening there in the next few months.
Yes, I saw a message from SASA actually saying that they were going to be moving to more online registration going forward, and that's a quick change just coming from one experience kind of translating into routine operations. Anybody else want to be adding on this? Yes, Tanya. Oh, sorry.
And just to say that this self-reporting mechanism, I think they have been very useful to respond to COVID. They have been used here in Colombia, but by the subnational system, like in Bogota, because as I said before, there are people who are not in any kind of register, so they cannot benefit from anything. But I just believe that is something that is just for COVID. I think that is something that is going to last for a very short period of time, because there is mistrust in these kind of things. And after the response has passed, there is a lot of debt, and you cannot sustain this. It's impossible to maintain this kind of programs giving cash for beneficiaries. So I think in the long term, this is not going to it's not going to stay with us for a long time. It's short and it's going to pass. And then we're going to go back to the traditional social registry instance and stuff like this. So the country will be able to target people and not to let everybody come in just by saying that they are in need. I just think that on the long term, it's going to change.
But that links to the discussion of the registration approach and its linkage with the targeting philosophy behind it and the sort of design elements of the targeting, and then how the registration approach links to that. Because, for example, take Togo, take Namibia, take South Africa, those were more universally leaning approaches. Guatemala as well kind of took a sort of on-demand application approach, and then cross-checking it in that case with consumption on electricity, kind of. So again, an innovative digital approach, but with a sort of more universally leaning system, and therefore in that case not having any form of socioeconomic targeting, but based on people's self-reported status and linkage with other databases to be able maybe to target out a few categories of people, so people working in the formal sector as an example. But these two things are intrinsically linked, and these are debates that we'll bring with us going forwards. And maybe, I mean, we can all play a role in pushing them in a certain direction. Yes, I heard a voice.
But I just got cut from internet. But on demand is difficult. It's different from self-reporting. Because
yes.
Self-reporting and saying I am in need, I don't have money, please give me some cash, basically. But on demand means that I am asking the government to look at my situation, to my income situation. So I have to go to the whole process. So it's different. So what I'm saying is in the future, we're going to go more on demand, but less on self-reporting.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you for the clarification on that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, so I see Rodrigo, but I'd also heard a voice before that I wanted to trace down. I don't know who it came from. Where is the voice? Okay, if the voice has disappeared, over to you, Rodrigo, sorry.
No, it's, I think this thing about connecting, cross-checking with different databases is absolutely crucial. So going back to the case of Brazil, those 33 million plus people that were selected from over 80 million that applied, so they applied, they gave their data, very small set of data, and then this was cross-checked with over 24 government databases that basically covered all the data infrastructure that we had. So there was a tax registry number, there were the income tax, the employer's registration for the formal sector, the employees, or the voluntary social contribution, the special insured benefits, micro individual entrepreneurs, the small business that we have, social benefits and employment benefits, Bolsa Familia, the public employees registries, the deaf registration systems, the civil registration systems, even the database on prisoners, politically exposed individuals, elected officials, the Cade Único, the military, the database of Brazilian abroad. So we basically chucked all this into a huge blender and then came out with the 30 million selection. So Brazil has a very weak identity, national identity system, or it doesn't have a national identity system. It's trying to get one for many, many years. But we have always done this in the past 20 years, this cross-checking with different databases in order to map out the gaps and then come up with something that you know, stands in itself. There's a big political struggle concerning the amount of error in this, be it fraud or not. So some people are saying it's like closer to 1.5%. Some people are saying it's closer to 6 or 7. But I think both figures, which are highly different, obviously, both figures for an emergency benefit are quite interesting. This was paid in 2 weeks. And then, of course, there's time to go after all this and refine and bring the numbers down. Bolsa Familia had a 3% error average in its existence. And I mean, it's a 97% accuracy record. We can't only look at the bad number, we have to look at the positive.
Yeah.
Very quick question on that, sorry.
Yeah,
what is the unique identifier which is in that case being used in Brazil if you don't have?
There is no unique identifier. It's the collection of this cross-checking, but since mostly it deals with money, obviously, the most prevalent of these numbers is what we call the individual tax registry. So it's a tax number, which is weak in terms of identification because it has no biometrics or anything, but it is very good in being unique. You can only really get one of these numbers. You could have many more in the past, but nowadays this has been depurated a lot. So it's extremely difficult for a person to operate financially with more than one number.
Yeah, and quite a lot of algorithmic data matching from what I understood. I mean, even so it's a combination of using a slightly more foundational number and then
and a huge, and that's, I think, what's different. Not only all these databases exist as this data infrastructure, but there is within the government huge data processing capacity. So
yeah, absolutely. One example actually on again, an innovative approach to targeting, but with a lot of problems, is using the tax registration number itself, which is what the US did for its emergency grants, which of course had big problems in terms of inclusion and exclusion. And actually we haven't, I just want to finish answering the question that we'd started on, which is the fact that in many cases, the social registry doesn't actually have some of that operationally leaning information like the bank account number of people. So even in cases where social registry data was used, there, as Rachel mentioned for Pakistan, but also in other countries, there was this additional layer where that piece of information was missing, to be reaching out for people to be linking their bank account information where it was missing, and or selecting a different approach to be receiving the payments. And with a lot of innovation on that, and the payments session focuses on that topic in particular. It's a separate session. Now, we're out of time and we've only managed to cover 3 questions, but the discussion forum will go into depth on all the others, and Tanya will let go to bed and answer tomorrow, but the ones of us who still have a day in front of us can be answering. And the discussion forum, I'll add the link again on the side. Do feel free to participate, ask questions, answer the existing questions. We'll be transferring those from Slido onto the discussion forum now, and we can be posting all the links in a systematic way. Yeah, so do share this with your colleagues, make sure you participate, and this will be a nice output from this clinic that we just spent together. So thank you everybody so much for your time and your engagement. I really enjoyed it. It's nice to get a few geeky heads together to be discussing these topics. Yeah, let's strive to make this as useful as possible for those who are less immersed in these topics. So even in our answers, to use sort of simple language and yeah, sharing resources that speak to the examples, because those are like speak more than 1,000 technical words. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and keep on joining into the next sessions that will be happening next on socialprotection.org. Bye all. Oh wait, I need to add the link to the discussion forum.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
I put it already, Valentina.
Ah, okay, thanks.
Last time you beat me by half a second. This time I was faster.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to close the room in 1 minute or 2 minutes. So if you want us to say anything to each other, you can still do. I'm not in a hurry today. So if you want to just chit chat a little bit.
Just one mention. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to take part in the second session of this one.
No worries. That's